Hello and welcome along. So I still haven't fixed my old mic and haven't bought a new one, so I'm stuck with a headset at the moment. This video is going to be about the time that Sanguinius fought Demon Angron during the Siege of Terra. If you think about it, this is one of the most anticipated epic one-on-one battles of the Primarchs of the entire history of the 40k universe. Sanguinius, the almost universally agreed to be the most capable individual single combatant amongst the Primarchs. And then there's Angron, the unstoppable close combat monster, raised to demonhood of Khorne, incredibly powerful, even back before he was raised to a demon, where he was so powerful that other Primarchs actually questioned their own chances against him, which was for people who were so incredibly skillful and arrogant. That was a very rare thing, and yet they did balk at the idea of having to face Angron. And then he's raised to demonhood by Khorne, so he's basically the perfect close combat monster. And at this point in his demonhood, he's so empowered by what's going on Terra. He's so full of the energies of the warp that are pervading the entire being of Terra at this time. So many people are dying, being killed in so many different ways. So much intense battle is occurring by so many people. We're talking literally trillions of people on both sides in one very small place. You imagine all of those people, all of that death, all of that war concentrated into one planet. And Khorne is feeding off of this, putting that power directly into his champion, Angron. So Angron is essentially invincible. He literally stands in front of the walls at one point and just lets the defenders fire all of their weapons at him. And I'm not talking about bolters and lasguns. I'm talking about anti-Titan weapons. They're just blasting him with everything they have on the walls. He just disintegrates him many times into nothingness, and he just regenerates, keeps regenerating. He's essentially invincible. You have this monstrous demonic gladiator that is Angron, who's fueled only by rage and the desire to kill. And then you have Sanguinius, the noble warrior, who has to use his innate abilities to try and defeat this creature. And that's not all he's got to do, because he's just defeated a great demon of Khorne, not just any, one of the greatest of all. I think it's pronounced Carbander, who is essentially Khorne's chief demon before he falls from grace, because he gets beaten by Sanguinius on Cygnus Prime at the beginning of the Heresy. So Sanguinius has already beaten this demon once, after actually being very badly injured by said demon, then quickly gets his revenge by beating him and banishing him. Carbander then goes back into the warp and spends, from what is his perspective, an eternity rebuilding himself, regaining his power by killing minor demons and growing on the outskirts of Khorne's domain, eventually to the point where he presents himself to Khorne and gives, in his sort of renewed state, and gives Khorne the ultimatum of, well, basically destroy me or let me take my place back where I was. And Khorne decides to give him a chance. So he basically sends him to the Siege of Terra and says, you have to give me 1,000 souls of the Blood Angels, because the Blood Angels were the legion that brought you down. You need to re-establish your position by taking their souls and giving them to me. And so he sets about doing that. He becomes known as the Bane of the Ninth, and he almost achieves this during the Siege of Terra, particularly at the end when they're trying to storm the Eternity Gate. But he doesn't, because Sanguinius intervenes. Now, Sanguinius has this epic battle with him first, defeats him again. Now, you might say, well, that's not too impressive, because he's already done it once, so he's just doing it again. Carbander is probably not any more powerful than he was the first time he met him, so you'd expect Sanguinius to win, and that's probably true. But to be fair to him, he is trying to command the entire defense of the palace at this point, so he's basically flying from all over the place, going back and forth, fighting many battles against many creatures, chaos demons, champions, titans, etc., while commanding his troops. And he finds time to defeat one of the most powerful demons in existence. And then immediately afterwards, he's got, it's Angron. Demon Angron comes flying out of the sky, and now he has to defeat him. So essentially what I'm saying here is Sanguinius is in basically the worst possible starting point for him to actually defeat Demon Angron. So now to set the scene of how incredibly hard this situation is for Sanguinius, you can imagine how this fight might play out. Essentially, every time he attacks Angron, Angron just regenerates. Every time Angron attacks Sanguinius uses his incredible skill to avoid the attack. But occasionally Angron manages to strike him, manages to catch him, because you can't avoid every single hit. And on top of this, there are many people from the ground just firing up random weapons at them. There's, there are various aircraft essentially flying around as well, trying to shoot them both down. So every now and again he gets hit, and over time this starts to wear him down. So even though he outfights Angron in a skill sense many times over, Angron just keeps coming back to 100% power within fractions of a second. And Sanguinius is taking these minor hits, but that are slightly building up, and he's already carrying many wounds from his previous battle with Karbanda, and then his previous long time leading the defense of the siege of the palace. So he's racked with wounds that he's just carrying his duty to serve, and so he just carries on with them. Whereas Angron never suffers from his wounds. Well, he briefly suffers from the pain of the wound, but he doesn't suffer from carrying them. It doesn't reduce his speed or his strength or his capabilities in any way, because he's instantly boosted straight back up to his full power by Khorne. And so the fight, there is essentially Angron getting more and more angry, which is hard to believe that he can get any more angrier, but he does, at the fact that he can't kill Sanguinius because he keeps moving out of the way. And Sanguinius getting more and more tired is the fact that he just can't seem to kill Angron no matter what he hits him with, because he just keeps regenerating. Now, this fight is actually written in a way to basically mirror another fight that's going on at essentially the same time, although not exactly, because it's in the warp, so it doesn't really, time has no real meaning. A one-on-one between two Primarchs, which we'll probably talk about another time, is happening between Vulcan and Magnus. And they have similar roles in their fight, where Magnus is easily able to kill Vulcan, but Vulcan just keeps coming back. And no matter how many times he kills him, Vulcan just keeps coming back. And Magnus has to just keep killing the Vulcan over and over and over again. And eventually, that wears Magnus down to the point where Vulcan can injure him. Now, this is the sort of flip side of that, where you've got obviously the traitor Primarch, the traitor Primarch in Magnus fighting the unstoppable regenerating monster that is Vulcan, who is actually a loyalist because he's got the Emperor boosting him, constantly regenerating him. Whereas in this fight, you've got the noble Sanguinius, the loyalist, outfighting Angron, killing him multiple times, but Angron, the monster, is just regenerated over and over again by Khorne. And so these fights are interwoven within the book, and it's quite interesting how they've done that. It's going back to focusing on Sanguinius and Angron. Essentially, the fight can't finish except for with Sanguinius being exhausted, because that's the only option, because Khorne has so much power because of what's happening on Terra that he can just keep regenerating Angron every time he gets mortally wounded. And this happens over and over again until eventually Sanguinius is brought down to the ground, and you could say he's about to die. He's being grappled by Angron, and Angron realizes that he can win at this point, that he actually finally has hold of Sanguinius and he can't get away. And that's when Sanguinius kind of does the impossible and manages to grab a hold of what is kind of still the butcher's nails stuck in the back of Angron's head, and these kind of dreadlocks these techno dreadlocks, as I think they're described. And he grabs hold of the butcher's nails that's sticking out the back of Angron's head still, even though he's now transmogrified into demon form. Somehow those techno dreadlocks still form part of his physical form. So they're so intrinsic to his nature that even though he's physically been altered completely into this demon form, like dissolved and reformed, they still exist and still have a kind of a detachment to reality. So when Sanguinius grabs a hold of them, he literally rips them out of the back of his head, out of Angron's head. It actually causes him a mortal wound. It does kill him. And sends him back. In his essence, essentially goes back into the warp, but he doesn't regenerate. It is the warp, so no one really knows what the rules are. This is just the way things are. And the fact that these butcher's nails have such significance to everything about who he is and what his journey was to becoming the monster he does become, it seems reasonable that they are in some way some metaphorical link to his mortality, and that by ripping them out, it does do something beyond what any other wound would do, and makes it not possible for Khorne to immediately regenerate him. So exactly why that happens is not explained, but that does seem reasonable. By doing this, Sanguinius does defeat Angron and in effect kills him in a way, the only way that he could have been killed at that moment. So it's basically a moment of inspiration where he realizes that that's his connection to reality, and ripping them out severs that connection. So what does this fight tell us? Well, first of all, it reinforces that idea that Sanguinius really is incredible. His ability is beyond really what any of the other Primarchs can do. Certainly what any of the Loyalist Primarchs could have done against Angron, particularly Demon Angron. He also tells us that if that age-old question, had Sanguinius and Angron fought when they were both Primarchs, normal Primarchs, not demons, not a demon Primarch versus a normal Primarch, Sanguinius would have probably won relatively easily because he manages to beat Angron in his demon form, which was, as we've discussed, practically impossible task. So yeah, he probably would overcome non-demon Angron pretty. I want to say easily, because that's probably too much to imply when you're talking about defeating a Primarch. But I think there's clearly enough difference between their skill levels that it wouldn't have been particularly hard for Sanguinius to have beaten him. Now, it's fair to say that there probably are disadvantages to being Demon Angron versus Primarch Angron, because it does take away pretty much all of his self-restraint to the point where he's literally just a ball of rage. But Angron really didn't have much self-restraint when he was not a demon anyway. Now, another question, perhaps a better question, would be, what would it be like for Sanguinius to fight Angron pre-Butcher's Nails? Now, Angron with an actual mind, being able to control himself, being able to make actual tactical decisions and use his skill instead of just sheer brute force, strength, speed, etc. That would have been an interesting matchup, because Angron probably is the most trained in close combat of all of the Primarchs, because he spends his life as a gladiator and he has to constantly test that skill against all sorts of different opponents, whereas none of the other Primarchs really had to do that, including Sanguinius, who are really mostly they're fighting people who are way below their abilities and on a much less frequent occasions. So I think Angron probably had the most training as a close combat specialist as a Primarch, and with his self-control back without the Butcher's Nails, he probably would have been quite a handful for Sanguinius. So it would have been an interesting fight, that one. But I don't think I could really make a decision on which one would win. I think that it's a hard one. I think a lot of it might come down to the war gear that they had at the time. So Sanguinius does have particularly good war gear. His spear can just cut through like the frontal armor of a Imperator Titan, so it would evaporate any Primarch instantly if he got a clean blow on them. So I think if it was hand to hand, you'd probably give Angron the edge because he's bigger and stronger, and so that high levels of skill and his higher strength probably would give him the edge. But Sanguinius with weapons, I think, is probably going to win. But then Sanguinius with his own weapons, I think he would win because they're just incredible. If they had the same weapons, like in a gladiator pit where they were just thrown weapons, perhaps you go back to Angron having the advantage. Now, I am talking about Angron here without the Butcher's Nails. So I do think once Angron has the Butcher's Nails, it just makes him less capable of defeating an opponent like Sanguinius, who's so incredibly skilled that he just was able to avoid the uncontrolled attacks of Angron. So there you go. What do you think? Who would win in a fight? Angron, Sanguinius, same weapons, in a pit, no Butcher's Nails. Go. So, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.